Okay, please put the torches and pitchforks down. I know what you're thinking.
What are you, nuts?
But here's the thing. I recently rewatched all of Game of Thrones, and although most of the series is some of the best TV ever made, I felt this inevitable dread of the 8th season heading my way. But then I watched it, and yes, although it's very flawed, it's not the absolute drizzling shits as most people say it is, and I found that Season 8, its story and character arcs, made a lot more sense than people give it credit for. Welcome back to Shade Cinema. My name is Chris, and today's video will tackle the biggest issues that fans have with the 8th season of Game of Thrones, and why those issues are not as bad as the fans say they are. I know it's been a minute since my last upload,
Shade Cinema has returned.
But this one's a doozy, so sit back and enjoy. Let's begin with one of the biggest issues that significantly impacted the story. When it comes to the character arcs, a lot of them aren't that great. Characters being dumb or just being completely different from who they were before really broke the immersion for most fans, as they would think something like Daenerys would never just burn down a whole city full of innocent people, right? I mean, that's not necessarily true. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. We all know that Daenerys prided herself as the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons, etc. But she also saw herself as a liberator, someone who would break the wheel that crushed the everyday citizen of the world. And throughout Essos, millions of people worshipped Daenerys. But when she arrived on the shores of Westeros, she found no such love there. The Westerosi saw Daenerys as an outsider who brought a foreign army to their shores, not someone who would liberate them from Cersei's tyranny. But why is that love so important to Daenerys? Throughout the story, Dany uses the love and respect that the people have for her to create the obedience necessary to rule effectively. And because she didn't receive that love from Westeros, Daenerys figured that she would need to use fear to obtain obedience, which is partially why she turned the Tarlys into barbecue.
Wow. This is the steak.
Tarly.
Steak.
Tarly.
Wow. Wow, that just tastes of burnt charcoal. I feel like I've got a barbecue in my mouth.
So Dany doesn't have the love of the people, but she does have a strong army, a very strong claim to the throne, loyal and competent allies, and 3 dragons. So she's still in a good position to conquer and rule Westeros, right? Well, she loses half of her forces during the long night, which certainly doesn't help her position, and the other factors that I mentioned get put into question throughout the season. Her claim as the last Targaryen is up in the air as it is revealed that Jon Snow, her lover, is actually the son of her late brother Rhaegar. This puts a lot of pressure on Dany, as her whole goal of reclaiming the Iron Throne is now threatened by someone who has an even better claim to it than she does. And Jon was loved more throughout Westeros than Dany, which only added pressure on her to assert her authority. Around the same time, many of her allies either died or abandoned her. Jorah, her most loyal advisor, was killed during the long night, and Missandei, her closest friend, was beheaded by Cersei. Her other allies, such as Sansa and Varys, abandoned her in favor of Jon. By the end, Daenerys was all alone and quickly running out of options. Then comes the situation with her dragons. The dragons, although they seem like wild beasts to us, were the only children that Daenerys could ever have. So when Viserion and Rhaegal died, it's as if her children died. And if you know anything about loss, a parent losing a child is one of the most devastating things that can happen to a person. And those deaths changed and shook Daenerys to her core. All of those factors put together, the loss of her friends, her allies, her lover, and her children, led to Daenerys burning down King's Landing, as there was no one left that she trusted that would have sufficiently opposed against the sack of the city. Her self-image as a liberator was used to justify and cope with her actions, because she saw King's Landing as being in the way of progress and the liberation of the people. Now, does that mean her actions are justified? Absolutely not. There can never be justification for annihilating innocent civilians. I'm just explaining why Daenerys did it. Sure, the show could have done a much better job in showcasing the loss that Daenerys felt, but it doesn't mean that the character didn't feel that, nor that the writers didn't intend that to be the case. More on those issues later. Let's move on to Daenerys' lover, our boy, Jon Snow. One big issue that fans had was the lack of impact that Jon Snow's lineage seemed to have on the overall story, and that there wasn't a big payoff for it. Although this is a fair point, it misses the reason that this fact was revealed. Jon's parentage was revealed to cause division and friction between him and Daenerys, not necessarily to have him vie for the throne. It's also a catalyst for Varys and Sansa's betrayals against Dany. Sansa didn't like Daenerys, and Jon being revealed as the last male Targaryen gave her an excuse to stop supporting Dany. Varys saw Daenerys' true nature, her likelihood for destruction, and Jon's popularity, and he therefore decided to support Jon. But Jon himself didn't want the throne. It seemed as though he didn't want it because he was simping for Dany, which he was, but also because he never really wanted power like that. He was reluctant to become king in the north and only accepted the role because of overwhelming support. And when he learned of his lineage, he said,
I don't want it.
Him following the advice of Varys to pursue the throne wasn't something his character would do. He united the wildlings and the Night's Watch because it was the right thing to do, and he became Lord Commander because others voted for him and believed in him, not because he wanted it.
I never have.
To him, these vows are sacrosanct. Remember, Jon pledged his loyalty to Daenerys, and Jon isn't someone who breaks his vows easily. Yes, there were exceptions like with Ygritte, but in the end, Jon still chose the Night's Watch over her because it was his duty. It was a difficult choice he had to make. Same with Daenerys. He swore loyalty to Daenerys and even loved her, but once he saw what she had done to King's Landing, and with some convincing from Tyrion, he did the right thing and killed Dany in the Red Keep. In that moment, he fulfilled Maester Aemon's warning.
Love is the death of duty.
But what about after that? Jon was sent back to the Night's Watch and to live beyond the Wall. A lot of fans have an issue with this creative decision, but let me ask you this. When did Jon feel the most free? When he was with the Free Folk. When he was with Ygritte. Beyond the Wall is his true home. He felt like an outsider at Winterfell, and the South didn't suit him. Plus, it was a political compromise. Without him going to the Wall, the Unsullied wouldn't leave Westeros, so he either had to die or go into exile. The obvious question would then be, couldn't Jon just return after the Unsullied left? Yes, but why would he? Jon could have returned and become king, but he chose not to. Instead of seeking power and glory, he chose peace, something that most characters in Game of Thrones never truly got. In doing so, Jon stayed true to his character. Also, the whole show was about breaking the wheel. If Jon becomes king, nothing really changes. Yeah, sure, we get a just king, but the genetic lottery of kingship is still at play. What's to say that Jon's son won't be as bad as Joffrey? By him not accepting the crown, the wheel has been broken, and now the king is elected by the Lords of Westeros. It is sort of a tragic and bittersweet ending, but this is Game of Thrones, what do you expect? Moving on to the third and last character I'm going to cover, any more and we'll be here all day, the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister. Jaime seemed to have a solid and consistent redemption arc throughout the show, but by the end it seems like the whole arc was thrown away when he joined back with Cersei. However, Jaime's arc wasn't straightforward. Despite being a seasoned warrior, he consistently battled with himself and his view of who he was, and he was shaped by guilt and self-doubt. Deep down, he never believed he could really change. So when things started falling apart at the end, with Daenerys threatening King's Landing, he ran back to what he knew: Cersei. Keep in mind, when Jaime left Cersei in Season 7, it wasn't because he didn't love Cersei anymore, but rather because he believed it was the right thing to do, to help the living defeat the dead. You might be thinking, she was clearly toxic for him. He should have stayed with Brienne. Why did he keep loving her? Well, this next part might be a bit complicated, so
Take a seat.
we can all agree that Jaime absolutely loved Cersei throughout the show, right? Here's the thing about true love. No matter how toxic or abusive the relationship is, true love never dies. Love isn't something you can just throw away like the wrappers of the burgers you had last night from Wendy's. To find that kind of extremely deep connection is rare, especially for these two, as they literally shared a womb together. In this case, it would be somewhat unrealistic if Jaime just all of a sudden fell out of love with Cersei. It's very difficult to walk away from love because you don't know if you'll ever love again. But Jaime did have a chance at another love, that being Brienne of Tarth. Their romantic relationship was definitely real. Brienne was someone who believed in Jaime, and she showed him that he could become a better person, well liked even by most of his cohorts. But when Jaime hears about the impending attack on King's Landing, he begins to panic. He was still not over Cersei, but yet seemed happy with Brienne. The truth is that Jaime didn't believe he was worthy of redemption. He didn't believe he deserved to be happy. He knew that Cersei was bad for him, but he believed that he deserved her for all that he's done. His self-loathing from all of his past crimes trumped any notion of redemption, happiness, and love, which is why his arc didn't have a satisfying conclusion, but instead had a tragic ending. Now that some of the characters that had been criticized the most by fans have been covered, let's look at another aspect of Season 8 that the audience had a big problem with. Game of Thrones is famous for its subversion of expectations, but Season 8's subversions weren't well received by fans. Here are a few that I think don't deserve as much hate as they get. The first is Arya killing the Night King. Now here's the thing. It would have made perfect sense if Jon had killed the Night King, as he fought the army of the dead on numerous occasions, but Jon had already done his job. He unified the Night's Watch and the Wildlings. He convinced Daenerys to pull up to the wall with 3 dragons. He essentially built a whole army to stop the Night King. It's not like Arya wasn't doing anything either. She had been training as a stealthy assassin for many years with the Faceless Men. She was even prophesized to shut many blue eyes forever by Melisandre. But what really foreshadowed her assassination of the Night King was the dagger that was given to her by Bran, which she later used. The dagger isn't just made from Valyrian steel. It isn't just the dagger that was used to attempt to kill Bran Stark, but it was also the dagger that inscribed the prophecy of Azor Ahai that states, "From my blood comes the prince that was promised, and his will be the song of ice and fire." So her killing the Night King with the prophetic dagger and with the use of stealth makes sense, at least in my book. Now where she jumped from and all of that stuff are things that the writers should have thought about more thoroughly, but that will be covered later in this video. Moving on, the next thing that fans didn't like was Bran becoming king. Now I know that all of you guys would have loved to see Jon be king, but like I said before, Jon didn't want to be king, nor was he really able to. So why Bran? For one, Bran is young, so he will presumably live for a long time, which would keep the realm stable. Second, Bran can't have children, which removes the possibility for a dynasty to be created. Remember, Daenerys' goal was just to break the endless cycle of monarchic dynasties which can lead to tyranny. So Bran not being able to have children makes dynastic rule, at least while he's king, impossible. Third, Bran is the three-eyed raven, meaning he can see everything that is happening in the world, which gives the crown a great leg up over everyone else. Plus, he doesn't seem to be a bad ruler at all. And realistically, who else would they choose? There wasn't anyone in the realm that would be capable of filling that role effectively. So am I saying that Bran would make for a good king and that he was the right choice? Yes. Moving on to the last big gripe that I'll cover in this section, which is Cersei's death. Now I know. Cersei should have died at the hands of either Arya or even Jaime, which the latter would have been an interesting twist. But I do think her death makes sense thematically. Throughout the show, Cersei has been gaining more and more power. She was very power hungry since her youth. By the end of the series, she's the Queen of Westeros and holds almost absolute power. But during the Battle of King's Landing, Cersei saw her power get wrestled away from her. She clung to the false hope of victory, which never came. And with the help of Jaime, she made her way down to the catacombs, where they tried to escape, but they were unable to. In the end, Cersei, the Queen of Westeros, the most powerful woman in all of the Seven Kingdoms, was unable to escape her demise and was ultimately crushed by the stones of the castle that symbolized her power. In the end, Cersei Lannister was powerless. We had Cersei as queen, but after her rule came Bran the Broken, and he decreed that everyone watching this video will subscribe to the Shade Cinema channel. Over 98% of you guys sit there and watch a 20+ minute video and not subscribe.
The hell with that goddamn motherfucking bullshit! Relax.
So like the video, subscribe to the channel, or else I will poison your wine and burn down your city. Moving on, this next bit will cover a very controversial episode. The Battle of Winterfell was heavily built up throughout the show. The army of the living versus the army of the dead. Jon Snow versus the Night King. Good versus evil. And we got that. Ish. It certainly was a massive battle, but the main issue that fans have was that it was too dark. I had originally complained about this as well when I first saw the battle, but this problem was later mitigated as the lighting of the episode was fixed on Crave. It's still very dark, but I think the darkness actually works for this battle. First of all, the episode is called The Long Night. What are they gonna do? Fight in the fucking daytime? Second, the darkness of night alongside the way the episode was shot made the battle feel very chaotic, which was the intended feeling that the creators were going for. Unlike conventional forces, the undead doesn't follow traditional formations. You see this by the way they literally crash into the battle lines of the living's army. This showcased the aforementioned chaos and how characters felt during the battle. Another thing that really stuck out to me was the evolution of the battle. A YouTube channel called The Closer Look talked about how a battle was to involve elements of hope and dread. Hope is the point where the situation begins to favor the protagonists, and dread is the point where the antagonists counter the hopeful moment. These elements play a big factor in the excitement and entertainment factors of a battle. For example, before the battle, the living built a trench that would be set ablaze as the dead approached it, creating hope. At some point during the battle, the dead pushed the living's forces all the way back to the trench, creating dread. Due to the cold caused by the Night King and his forces, the trench wouldn't ignite by flaming arrows, creating even more dread. Seeing this unfold, Melisandre comes out of the castle to light the trench using her magic, stopping the Night King's advance, which creates hope. But then, some of the undead's forces sacrifice themselves and build makeshift bridges so that the rest of the dead can walk over the corpses safely, which creates more dread. This is just one set of examples that showcases the escalation of the battle, which really significantly increases the tension throughout the episode. So overall, I find that this episode is pretty solid, but it definitely has its flaws. And speaking of flaws, let me discuss the flaws in the 8th season that I find are indefensible. Although Season 8 gets a lot of flack, a lot of which is unwarranted, it certainly has its issues. One that I want to mention is Tyrion's fall to stupidity. Tyrion throughout the show was portrayed as a very intelligent and clever man. He almost always made the right choices politically. But in Seasons 7 and 8, he was written as if he didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. Attacking Casterly Rock for no reason, trying to bargain with Cersei even though she isn't trustworthy at all, and his unwavering loyalty to Daenerys until the events of King's Landing, all are things that Tyrion wouldn't do. Even though I said before that Arya killing the Night King was a good decision overall, I do firmly believe that Jon and the Night King should have had a proper duel. Something like Jon ambushes the Night King so that he doesn't raise the dead immediately, and they have a duel until the Night King raises his minions. That would have been great to see, but for whatever reason, they didn't go for it, which is a big L. Some characters seem to have plot armor, such as Arya surviving an almost literal nuke in King's Landing. To be fair, they did want to portray the destruction of the city through the eyes of a main character, but it still seemed weird how she dodged death a million times. The Battle of Winterfell also had many characters wear plot armor, like when Jon was hiding behind a rock to avoid the fire breath of Viserion, which is weird because we just saw that dragon tear apart the wall.
Weird.
Other characters like Jaime and Brienne also somehow survived even though they were completely surrounded by the dead. That's all pretty stupid. The main issue with the 8th season, and to an extent the 7th season, is something that I touched upon throughout this video. Almost every problem that this season had was due to how rushed it was. If they had spent more time developing the arcs, writing in important dialogue such as Dany feeling depressed or Jon explaining why he doesn't want the throne, or any other incomplete or rushed storyline in this season, the reception to the controversial decisions wouldn't have been nearly as negative. But because they didn't take their time with the story, the ending overall felt very flat and anticlimactic, to the point where the popularity of the show died soon afterward. Remember, Game of Thrones was the #1 most torrented TV show of all time because it had the whole world by the balls. It held so much cultural significance, and almost everyone has either seen or heard about the show. But because of how poorly received that last season was, nobody talks about it as much anymore, which is really sad. I almost didn't watch the show for a second time because of the last season, out of fear that I would be enthralled by the story and lore of this world, only for it to end in a shit way. But after rewatching season 8 again, the ending still felt flat and anticlimactic, but the overall storylines made sense. I'd say give the whole show a rewatch, including season 8, and go into it with an open mind. You might not like the ending, but you'll appreciate the storylines and the plot points a lot more. You'll appreciate it more as a bold, ambitious, but very flawed and imperfect ending to a nearly perfect piece of cultural cinema. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more breakdowns like this one. Comment down below your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree with the takes that I made. I will read and reply to all comments. Also, follow me on Instagram for updates and other cool things. If you would like to learn more about King Joffrey's one very good idea, click the link on the right side of the screen.